After the First World War, our nation faced possibly the harshest peace terms of all Central Powers. We lost nearly 2/3 of our lands, with millions of ethnic Hungarians being forced to live outside of our nation's borders. Together with the Treaty of Trianon, which crippled our army to a meager 50,000, our loss in the Great War is one of the most significant national tragedies for our country. Especially since our kingdom now stands without a monarch, with the Admiral Miklos Horthy being imposed as regent since 1920. But despite this, everything isn't just doom and gloom, because with the political climate of Europe shifting after the rise of fascism in Italy and Germany, the time for revenge may soon arrive. We've even started aligning with the Germans, who just like us want to get rid of the harsh treaties imposed by the Entente. Mainly through the Gömbös Trade Treaty, giving us favorable price for sale of wheat and the ability to purchase German industrial goods for the benefit of our economy, with only a slight drawback in economic independence. This has however allowed us to avoid exaggerated intervention in our economy, as it has been able to grow without our help. However, as we are the least industrialized of all our neighbors, Horthy has announced several government investments to make our economy competitive and eventually ready for war. It started with infrastructure investments together with the Austrians and Czechoslovaks, as we connected our splintered imperial railroads. Horthy continued by appointing Lajos Remeni Schneller as Minister of Finance, who immediately helped the Guns Works Iron Company to expand and centralize our industrial capabilities. He also started promoting increased urbanization, which will naturally lead to more factories, as industrialists will see the opportunity to construct new ones. This left one thing in our current economic plan: revaluing our currency. Despite it being unpopular, it is necessary to ensure that the inflationary crisis of the Great Depression never repeats, ensuring investor stability. During all these economic reforms, Horthy had slowly ensured that this regency would continue, because as it is it who is bringing us prosperity, if we wish for prosperity to continue, so too must the regency. And even if our fascist prime minister seeks something else, Horthy has been able to reinforce his own place as the regent. But to ensure that it actually continues, more power was granted to Horthy, and a law was enacted which codified how a new regent will be chosen once Horthy passes away. Then, with the death of our fascist prime minister and a more Horthy-friendly minister taking his place, only a few more reforms would ensure total control for our regent. But before these were implemented, with the political climate in Europe becoming ever more turbulent, like with the German remilitarization of the Rhineland, we see an opportunity to justify rearmament. Even if it will be kept secret for now, so the Entente countries don't intervene. This allowed us to move to partial mobilization, which means our state possibly has surpassed the industrial capabilities of all our neighbors. Going back to securing the regency, Horthy had devised two starting points for further control. The first was to ban the fascist party of National Will, as they openly oppose our regency and seek almost full submission to the Germans. The second is to destroy the opposition on the other side, the Democrats and Communists. We therefore started restricting voting rights, as it is at the polls they are growing the most. But we kept away from totally restricting elections, instead making sure to strengthen the political party of the current Horthy-friendly prime minister, so it can serve as a party of national unity. Together with it, two separate parties were founded who will serve as a vanguard against the left, while keeping plausible deniability for our governing party. And so, complete control for Horthy has been achieved, which means we can continue with the militarization efforts that were started with our secret rearmament. It had actually provided us with more than 100k in free manpower, but to deploy more of our current divisions with these resources would be a waste, since our divisions are weak. Instead, we engaged in small-scale war games to then use this experience to improve the regiment composition in the future. At the same time, we launched a propaganda campaign to spur our people against the Trianon Treaty, further raising our manpower and war support. Since our stability had also recovered from the times of political oppression, we decided to use our momentum to draft a strongly worded renunciation of the treaty, and just like we had expected, the Romanians did nothing to stop us, showing that they are a paper tiger. And this means that true militarization can begin, as we no longer need to keep it a secret. It also allowed us to focus on the industrial part of it, as Horthy announced the Götterdämmerung program. A program that will extend quite far, allowing us to invest into our arms industry. But before full-on military factories were being invested in, we started by laying the groundworks. This was expanding the Hungarian Academy of Science with the focus on military research and opening up new mines to provide the resources for our upcoming war machine. Specifically, the last part had already started long before today, as exports to countries like Portugal and the Baltic nations provided us with enough income to fuel further resource extraction. And with the investment into Manfred Weiss steel and metal works, the first military factories started to being built. Soon enough, we enacted new laws that would allow even more factories to be constructed by the state, all in the name of defense, of course. And to help us, Istvan Horthy, Horthy's eldest son, was appointed as War Industrialization Minister. But with all these new future factories, the question about our division composition rises again, as we so far have done nothing with them. To help us decide, we staged further war games to develop and explore new tactics. During all this militarization, the political climate of Europe had continued escalating. The Germans had Anschlussed Austria with little to no protest from the Western powers. And this allowed Hitler to continue his expansion, mainly demanding the Sudetenland. With the French and British caving in once again, the partition of Czechoslovakia could begin. It started with the Germans annexing their demands, but since we had been great friends with the Germans, together with the Italians, they forced Czechoslovakia to cede southern Slovakia to us in the first Vienna Award. Only a month later, German troops crossed into the rest of Bohemia, and with Slovakia rebelling against Prague joining the Germans instead, the nation of Czechoslovakia ceased to exist. We also got more land from this final collapse, as we could annex Transcarpathia. And so the first steps to restoring Greater Hungary has started without a single war. Going back to our military exercise, we have found how we should reform our army. Due to our small population, we will focus on quality over quantity, and the quality we will use is tanks and other forms of rapid units. We have even formed 2 rapid corps divisions, who we will include in our training from now on to find out the best regiment composition. In the backgrounds, our scientists have also started researching mechanized units and a basic medium tank chassis, and with the start of the first part of the Götterdämmerung program, our military industry is comparable to the Polish. With all this success, we turned to foreign policy with the goal to move closer to the Germans in order to join the Axis, now including the Italians, as together we can fight against the communists in the east and Western powers who imposed the harsh treaties on us in the west. We started with economic friendship as we secured contracts with German companies like Rheinmetall, who will help us in artillery production. We then invited German investors who we together with further expanded our mining industry. And so we are now ready to join the Axis. However, with war having already started as the Germans invaded Poland, we decided not to join yet, as we aren't ready. We are approaching readiness, however, as production of our mechanized equipment has already started and we have designed the first part of our division. We are, however, still working on the tank part of the division, which we plan will be self-propelled artillery. Even if it will be costly to produce, our industry, which now has reached its maximum capacity so far, we will be able to manage it. Since this also means we can't build any more factories, we instead switched to constructing infrastructure and a land warfare facility to speed up our research into tanks. While we did this, the war between the Axis and Allies had picked up speed significantly, as the Germans had in about 2 months overran the Benelux and the French, which led to the capitulation of one of the 2 major powers in the Allies. In Africa, the Italians also advanced into Egypt, capturing the choke point of El Alamein and closing in on Alexandria. All these victories are not something we want to miss out on, so even if we aren't ready, we decided to sign the Tripartite Pact and officially join the Axis and its war. Strangely enough, we joined at the same day as the Iron Guard took control in Romania, who immediately joined the Axis too, meaning we are in the same alliance as the Romanians. However, they aren't our main enemies, that is the Soviets in the east, who the Germans are secretly planning to eventually attack. Also at the same time, our scientists had finished designing our assault artillery tank, which had now entered production, allowing us to finally finish our division. It will consist of 11 mechanized and 3 self-propelled artillery battalions, as well as some support companies where hopefully more will be added in the future. Now all we have to do is to wait for our currently 6 divisions to be fully supplied, and while we do, we can return to economical stuff, because imports of important war resources are being restricted by the British fleet. And this especially affects German oil imports, whose only stable import nation left is Romania. Fortunately, we have during our other resource extraction expansions found oil deposits around Pécs. So, seeing how our divisions also need a lot of oil, we immediately tapped these newfound deposits and started prospecting for even more in the area. In the meantime of all this, we had started promoting Hungarianism, which culminated in us reaffirming our lost territorial claims officially. And these claims weren't unanswered, because Germany, recognizing us as an important ally, held the Second Vienna Award, where they together forced Romania to cede northern Transylvania to us. While we had hoped for more, this will still be seen as another great victory without a single war. Some months later, the World War escalated further as Italy declared war on Greece, which caused the Yugoslavian regent to in fear sign the tripartite pact. However, only 2 days later, a pro-British military coup overthrew the regent, causing the Germans to order a swift invasion of the country, one which we will join. Even if our 6 divisions aren't fully equipped or trained, we will still be able to use them to reconquer our rightful Hungarian lands. The invasion started in Vojvodina, which was completely unprotected, and in many villages we were met as liberators. We could then cross the Danube with still no resistance, allowing our fast divisions to penetrate deep into the Yugoslavian lands. Less than 5 days after the start of the war, we had reached the Serbian capital, which had been so surprised by our blitz invasion no defenses were present. The first Yugoslav army units we met were also just as surprised, as they were still undergoing mobilization, which allowed us to quickly encircle the 6 divisions and begin demobilizing them. In the meantime, we continued advancing towards the Adriatic Sea, which together with the Germans capturing Zagreb prompted the Ustaše to declare their independence from Yugoslavia and join our side instead. Only a few days later, the Yugoslavian government went into exile as their last forces were defeated. With all the Yugoslav lands now divided between all of us, with us getting Vojvodina, we could technically return home. However, we decided to instead send 4 of our divisions to Greece, where we helped the coalition of Axis forces to defeat them. Unsurprisingly, it was harder than fighting the Yugoslavs, as low supply made everything difficult. Despite this, Athens was captured and we staged the last offensive to capture the Peloponnese for Mussolini. Returning home with much of Greater Hungary's border restored, we started the real reintegration works, as so far only those of Hungarian ethnicity have been integrated. We started with the former Slovakian lands, as they have been a part of us the longest, but the rest will follow soon. At this moment we received orders from the Reich to begin preparing for war with the Soviets. The last enemy before all of mainland Europe lies under the Axis. So we sent our divisions to the small front we have with the Soviets and started training 4 more divisions. While we with our small amount won't be able to defend or attack swaths of land, our job will more be to support our allies' spearheads and conduct small but highly important pincer movements. And so the 3rd of April, Operation Barbarossa commenced. That same day we crossed into Stanislav, which was severely understaffed by the Red Army, allowing us to advance even without any Axis support. And soon enough, after the city of Stanislav was captured, we achieved our first encirclement in this war, over 300,000 Soviet men. With our allies now having taken over the offensive and defense of the region, we could begin our encirclement objectives. The Germans had already achieved a breakthrough slightly north of where we were, so we began a second pincer, which started well as we threatened to encircle close to 20 divisions. Unfortunately, as we were only 1 province away from closing it, that province was part of the swamps of Belarus, rendering our mechanized and self-propelled artillery fully useless. So this encirclement sadly failed. But not to sorrow, because we moved our forces to the most southern part of the front, where our mobility was much greater. And together with our Romanian and Italian allies, we encircled Odessa and killed about 20,000 in the process, as unfortunately most Soviet forces successfully fled by the Black Sea. After reorganizing our forces, we continued into Ukraine as we broke through the Soviet lines and arrived all the way to the Dnipro River. But like we will hear several times in the future, our offensive got halted due to bad supply. So we shifted our attack as usual, this time to capture Kiev. Splitting our forces in two, we were able to make a small pincer on the way to the city, which encircled a single division, and we could then capture the capital of the Ukrainian SSR. About at the same time at home, our 4 extra divisions had been deployed and further resource extraction investments had been conducted. A lot more money was also spent on research, as it is necessary to keep our military technology ahead of our enemies. Back to the front, with autumn arriving, we decided to send all our troops north so we can help the German pushes in Belarus and the Baltics before everything gets too cold in the winter. After the fall of Leningrad and further German advances in the center, our job in these two regions is done for now. However, as we left the south of Ukraine in the hands of the Romanians and Italians, the Soviets could stage a minor counterattack, retaking their supply hub south of Cherkasy. So we will now punch back, and even harder than before, as 6 more of our divisions have been deployed. We struck right as the Soviets reorganized their forces, meaning their lines were incredibly thin. And this made itself seen because the supply hub they had captured was rapidly liberated, with 2 divisions encircled as a bonus, and with a little defense in depth we could continue driving along the Dnipro. Soon we arrived to Dnipropetrovsk, and from here we crossed to Zaporizhia, threatening to encircle the whole southern Soviet army. And this threat was realized as we outflanked the army, and together with advances closing the escape through Crimea, about 15 Soviet divisions were destroyed, leaving the whole southern front extremely undefended. But before we could decide whether to use this to move north, aiding the offensive to Moscow, further east towards Stalingrad, or to the south towards the Caucasus, we received a distress call from the Italians. The Allies, now joined by the United States of America after the Japanese invasion of the Philippines, had naval invaded Sicily and fought their way up to Napoli. And since the Germans nor the Italians seem to be responding, it is our job to fix this for an incompetent ally. So we sent over 6 of our divisions, which means only 10 are left on the Soviet front. So we chose the least risky plan of going north, helping an already existing offensive instead of creating a new one. Since there were so few Soviet divisions, we were able to capture Kharkov in only a few short days, and in the process we even encircled a few more troops. As we arrived south of Kursk, however, our supply lines were stretched too thin for us to be able to capture the city, so we took a pause. And right at that moment our 6 divisions had arrived to Italy, where we had stopped the British forces from going further north than Rome. With not that many enemy divisions present, we immediately staged a counter-offensive before they are able to reinforce, and this way we were able to encircle Rome and later Napoli. After some struggle to defeat the encircled troops, we continued south, where we quickly liberated Puglia. But then, as we tried to advance further into Calabria, we got halted by British reinforcements. So we decided to simply keep our forces here in Italy on the fallback line, while we can continue to defeat the Soviets with our 10 divisions. Because during our Italian expedition, the Germans had continued our offensive and we now have the perfect opportunity to capture Moscow. With few Soviet forces in the area, we easily broke through and could arrive to the capital of communism. Though with a garrison in the city, we had to first encircle it and then from all sides enter the capital until our mechanized could freely drive on the Red Square, which we will try to get the Germans to rename it to Miklos Horthy Square. And so, with the capital of the Soviet Union in our hands, the Soviets have lost right over 50% of all their cities for them to capitulate. But we have actually come far more than halfway, because compared to the start of the war, we are seeing full breakthroughs far more often now as the Red Army with its 3 million losses is growing tired. The only thing that could save them now is an intervention from the West, but with the failure of their Italian campaign and the Japanese ravaging their Southeast Asian colonies, this looks highly unlikely. And so the last chapter of Operation Barbarossa began. It started with us utilizing our breakthrough in Moscow to encircle a bunch of troops, first around Tula, then in the north of the former capital, where together with Yugoslavia and Volgoda city being captured, another 20 plus divisions were encircled. But this was not the fun part, because that party had already started in the south, where German and Romanian forces had pushed past Stalingrad in longitude and into the steppes north of the Caucasus. As soon as we arrived, we joined the offensive to the preliminary capital, where we advanced from the north of it to avoid having to cross a river. Though we still had to do this, as with the garrison in the city, the simplest way to enter it will be to copy our offensive in Moscow. And this we did, encircling Stalingrad and capturing the last of the 3 big cities of Russia. Immediately after, leaving the Germans to deal with the Soviet forces encircled west of Russia, we went further south to join the Caucasus offensive. It started with us committing 7 divisions to the attack towards Crimea, where we first arrived to the peninsula, crossed the straits onto Kerch, and then drove unopposed to Sevastopol, having outflanked its defenses. Returning to the main Caucasus offensive, we went along the coast of the Black Sea until reaching Batumi, where we resupplied our divisions. And from there we went into the Georgian inlands, then reaching Azerbaijan until once again reaching a sea, the Caspian Sea and the city of Baku. At this point we received some of the first worrying news in a while. The Allies had stepped up their game, naval invading Italy and scoring some initial landings in France. However, this is nothing to worry about. They are too late nonetheless, because with the Soviets 80% towards capitulation, the final battle can now begin.
Legszebb katonája, masírozok Kepler úr szavára, úgy gondolok az én violámra, mert Horthy Miklós katonája vagyok, legszebb katonája.
Victory is ours. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics has capitulated and our Axis faction stands as the rulers of Eurasia. Now, while the Germans will control the administration of the big majority of former Soviet lands, we were allowed to set up associate governments in Karelia and Mongolia. Both are linguistic or are cultural brothers. Looking to the west, all invasions in France had been defeated, and even if the Allies advanced to a point of causing a civil war in Italy, with the Soviets' front gone and the Italians now a puppet regime of Germany, the second reconquest had already begun and seen great successes as more than 30 divisions have been encircled. So after all our battles and with the Allied hope close to gone, we can soon expect some form of peace talks to begin, or at least a ceasefire, since no side will be able to terminate the other. But at the very least, peace has set in for our people, since our armies have returned home and a slow but steady demobilization has begun in our Hungarian lands. Peace is even more assured now that our new states are cored, including West Banat, which we received from the Germans. And so, even if not all our claims have been achieved, Horthy proclaimed Greater Hungary. The old treaties of the West have been fully destroyed, and as we were the leading factor of the destruction of communism, we fully deserve the title of Great. So, thanks so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed this video and see you in the next one.